In our previous video, we provided a short introduction into the pipeline model and showed its use case. But let's just reset what we were talking about, because this is what we're going to focus on in this video. So you recall that we had introduced 3 pipelines that we will build and that we deliver when we first deploy the solution for you. So over the next series of 3 videos, I'm going to take you through creating a generic onboarding pipeline exactly like this, take you through the logic that we apply for the various stages. I will then, in one of the series, I will create for you your candidate application form and the notification to send the forms to the candidates at the right time according to the pipeline stages. So you recall that for a given job, we can attach a pipeline model to it. There are no limits to the number of pipelines that you can create, and in fact you can create different pipelines for different jobs. So here's an example of our generic onboarding job, and we can see here that these are the stages that we've got in the pipeline that our candidates are going to go through, and we're going to want to implement a number of automations on the basis of the stages and as they work through them. So now let's go into our Squirrel system and let's start now creating the first pipeline. So remember, I'm just going to I'll cut and paste a bit of this information because it makes it a little bit faster for you and you don't need to see my boring typing. But essentially what we want to do is create our generic onboarding pipeline. You recall that we have 3 pipelines, and I'll cover these more in detail, but the generic onboarding pipeline is the one that we are going to use when we want to manually insert candidates into the process. You might recall that when we first did the introduction video prior to this, we manually parsed a CV and took our candidate into the process. There are going to be other ways in which we do that, through likely jobs that we publish and candidates apply for, and therefore we'll apply a different pipeline. This pipeline is for manually inserting candidates into your process. So on that basis, we don't need a published candidate pipeline. Published candidate pipeline is used when we publish the job. Somebody applies for the job from the jobs board, they'll go through the published candidate pipeline, but we don't need that. We're going to cover the published candidate pipeline in a subsequent video. So initially, when we first add a pipeline, you see it creates 3 individual pipelines within a group. We've just talked about the published candidate pipeline, and here we have the unpublished candidate pipeline. In other words, the pipeline candidates will go through when any jobs associated with this pipeline definition are not published. We won't be covering the concept of the vacancy pipeline. The process of the vacancy pipeline is around that for authorizing or approving a vacancy to be published, typically used in a corporate environment where they might have a number of stages that need to be satisfied, business cases, etc., to be completed before a vacancy will be approved, and only then, once it's approved, will it be able to go live to the jobs board. But we don't want our pipeline to go live, because this is a manual one that we're using. So we're going to insert another stage here, because a candidate always comes into the left-hand most pipeline stage. So you notice here this is a pipeline stage 1, pipeline stage title. So I'm going to add another one, and I'm just going to call this, we'll call this onboarding. Doesn't really matter what you call it, because we simply want this as the first stage to be created on our job so that it doesn't go live. Now, you can imagine that when we actually have jobs that we're publishing and we're searching for candidates, we want to search talent pools. We're not using talent pools for our manual pipeline, so we don't need that. But what we do need is we need a stage for our candidates to enter. So we're going to call this an entry stage. Save that. We don't need the invited stage, because the invited stage is what we use with temporary jobs. In other words, we've got a job to fill, we've got a schedule for that job, and we may invite one or more candidates to invite them to fill shift vacancies. And then we can set some processes around that workflow about what happens when we invite a candidate to fill a shift. But again, not needed in this situation because clearly we are just manually getting our candidates into our pipeline. We want to register them, we want to do phone screens, we want to interview, reference check, and carry out inductions. That's the purpose of this pipeline. Now you notice here that we have a stage number called -1 in this case, and then we have a number for accepted and we have a number for rejected. Now I like to create big gaps between the numbers because it does it in numerical order. So now I put 1000 here. So now I'm in the position where I can enter new stages to happen through this process, and I can insert them by simply having a number that's greater than the leftmost column or and less than the one on the right. So in other words, I've got to have a new stage here which is going to be greater than 1 and less than 1000. So these are the stages that we want. We want to have a registration stage. Now I won't go into why, but just keep in the habit of creating your code when you create a pipeline status to be the same name as the title. So that's our first stage is going to be registration. And then potentially from registration, we're going to perform a right to work check. So we'll create that one now. And you notice here that I'm going to just leave a good number of 100 between each one. So I'll go 200 now. Then we'll add the next one. After we may potentially want to complete a phone screen. Again, we increment by 100. Just bear with me while I put in all the stages that we created for your out-of-the-box workflow. And then once you understand how we've done this, you're going to be in a great position to be able to modify these pipelines to your specific requirements and add new ones as required. Oh, added that to the wrong one. Again. So now we've got enter, registration, right to work, phone screen, arrange interview, reference check, and the final one we need, of course, is our induction. So now we've got our complete pipeline. Now, of course, we've got a bit more work to do because for each given stage, we can specify the automations that we want to happen. So what I'm going to do in the next video, I'm actually going to create the candidate registration form that is required or that is automatically sent to our candidates when they are registered or when they land in this pipeline stage. So each time a candidate arrives in a stage, then the settings here will determine what actions are taken on that candidate. And I'm going to describe those in detail now in my next video. And then once we've got our forms that we want to complete, see what's going to happen is we're going to have a registration form that we want to happen here. We're going to want to do a phone screen. We're going to want to do an in-person interview. We're going to do a reference check, and we're going to do an induction. So what I like to do is with the final stage in getting my structure right, is I like to create the framework for those forms that are going to complete in these stages. So let me just create that framework now. So we go to notification template, we go to assessment review, and we're going to create our first candidate application form. All I'm going to do is name this candidate registration. I'm not going to define it. I want to do a phone screen, so we'll create the framework for that too. So it's phone screen. I want to create the interview questionnaire for the in-person interview. I want to do the induction. And we also want to create a reference check to be completed. So we go to our reference check template and we add our reference check here. So now, of course, we can go back to our pipeline and we can attach the assessments that we want to happen at this various stages. So we'll click on here in the registration, and here on this stage, we want to complete the candidate registration. And then when the candidate registration is completed by the candidate, we want somebody to review that registration. So we'll create the reviewers here. Now this is the link back to the organizational structure that we discussed earlier in this course. And essentially we're going to say that the recruitment consultant will be responsible for reviewing the candidate registration. The phone screen, this introduces a slightly different model because the phone screen is not something that we want to review because we're actually going to complete the phone screen internally. Normally an assessment therefore is done for a candidate, but we're going to assist the completion of that because we're going to have someone ring and fill out the questions, the responses to the questions when speaking to the referee. And again, we want the head office recruitment consultants to be assigned these tasks. So we just continue to we'll just fill out these last ones. So again, the interview is exactly the same because that is something that we're going to fill out on behalf of the candidate essentially. So again, the assisters will be the recruitment consultants, the position. The recruitment consultants will be assigned these tasks. I could assign it to more than one person. It's entirely up to you. Now this here is the reference check. So here we collect reference check, add a reference check, and generic. Now the reason, again, this will be an assisted reference check. Now we won't cover it in this course, but we actually can automate the reference checks to be sent to the referees by email, and they click on the link and they complete it. So now we'll go in the final stage is we want the induction to be completed. Now the induction is different because the induction is going to be sent to the candidate. Therefore, we don't need to assist them to complete it. But we do want somebody to review the induction once it's completed to make sure that we can move the candidate on in the pipeline. So we'll finish this video now, but as a recap, what we did is we completed these stages. We defined them in the order that we wanted. And then because on specific stages we have specific assessments that we wanted to complete, we created the framework for those assessments here. And in the next video, I'm going to actually complete this form, show you all of the tricks and how you can do that. And then after that, we'll then go into how do we create the notification so that the candidate always knows what's going on as they move through the process. Thank you very much.